Between the surging of the sea and the soughing of the pines, hear a far-off human sigh. It's hard to believe this lovely Norfolk was once the South Pacific Devil's Island, a place of deliberate and calculated inhumanity. The Governor of New South Wales set the theme. The felon sent here is forever excluded from all hope of return. James Say, executed 1842. Stop, Christian, stop and meditate on this man's sad and awful fate. On earth no more he breathes again. He lived in hope, but died in pain. In this most cruel of the penal colonies, they died violently, purged of their wickedness, the stern governors believed, by the scaffold and the lash. One of the convicts, Thomas Salisbury Wright, from Frodringham, in Yorkshire, was lashed for failing to take off his cap before an officer. He was 95 at the time, but he still lived to be 105. But most of Norfolk's convicts met the hangman young. In other places of despair around the world, in concentration camps and torture chambers, the horror remains. But here a gentle peace has soothed away the torments of yesterday, placated the restless spirits of those unhappy men. The island was relieved of its burden of human misery more than a century ago, in 1856, when the convict ships sailed away forever, leaving this green and sensuous island empty and available. So the first invasion of lonely Norfolk Island, 1,000 miles from anywhere, was caused by the need to find a safe prison, a place of secure preventive detention for those 18th century hard cases. The second invasion of Norfolk was caused by the descendants of the Bounty mutineers who outgrew Pitcairn Island. The third invasion of Norfolk Island was caused, I'm told, by me. I was here filming some 10 years ago in October 1960. There aren't many places in the world which escape these visitations. And the film that resulted was called Whicker Down Under, and it went out on a particularly cold, wet, miserable Sunday in November.
You suddenly said, well, here we are, this is Norfolk Island. It's about 1,000 miles from Sydney, sun shines all the time, no income tax, no death duties, little bit of electricity, a few motor cars, and you then spoke to an old gentleman with a box of fruit and you said, well, Mr. Elliot, what does it cost you and the wife to live here? So he said, well, about £10 a week. And you concluded by saying, well, there it is, anybody want to live on Norfolk Island, good night. And I suddenly thought, well, £10 a week, he's talking about Australian currency, he means £7.10 sterling, which gave me seriously to think. And I turned to my wife and said, how'd you like to live there? She said, I think it'd be a great idea. What? But 12 months later, we eventually arrived out here via a cargo ship from Rotterdam.
Now, had I exaggerated or overstated or understated?
Oh, understated, if anything.
Really?
Because we thought it was a paradise when we first arrived here, and we still think so.
And so, it seems, do many other viewers, 40 or 50 of them, who changed the course of their lives after that program and travelled halfway around the world to this speck in a distant ocean where nothing bites or stings, and they feed the pigs on wild peaches. They threw a party to show me how happily they're living ever after, that some have found life in paradise has its particular tempo.
I've been used to, if I pick up a phone and I want something done and I'm paying for it, then it gets done. And there's no problem at all. Here, you could pay $100, and it doesn't make any difference, you know. Actually, it's a good way to be. You know, you don't get ulcers that way, do you?
All right, you are. I mean, Norfolk time is any old time.
Yes.
You don't go by the clock, you just go by, well, you know, how you feel. Exactly.
There must be some disadvantages, presumably. It can't all
Oh,
be.
yes, there's a lot of frustrations.
Like what?
Well, in the shops, food, for instance, it's always coming on the next boat. You know,
can't make a menu.
You can't make a sort of. If you have dinner party, you have to change it all.
Yeah.
Have something else, don't you? It's sort of.
Norfolk's a state of mind. And if you're not that state of mind, you wouldn't.
It's always.
But if the only frustration is you have to change your menus, you haven't done badly.
No,
So.
no, we love it here.
It's beautiful.
In fact, we were going to leave at the end of this year, and we've decided to stay on. and built another house. We sold our house, and afterwards...
That's an enormous profit.
Oh, dear.
No.
Of course. No. Who would sell otherwise?
Would you? You two met?
Oh, yes, we're all friends. Yes.
We're all friends, yes.
No, I know a chap down here. As I'm a mechanic, I deal with him quite a bit, and he runs one of the garages here. And I can guarantee you that if he had 10 cars in the lot, and you walked in with $10,000, and I'll say, I'll give you $1,000 for each car, and he didn't feel like it, he'd turn away and walk away. That's the way he is. And this is, to a certain extent, the way the island people are. And there's nothing wrong with it. The only time you feel that they're irresponsible is when you want something done.
What about things like, I don't know, getting licenses to, driving licenses?
Ah.
Well, I believe that's quite easy.
Very easy. Yes, very easy. Well, I got mine. I better not mention the policeman's name in case it might go against his record, but when I had only been in the car about 2 hours, and it was a case of having to drive, or else walk about 3 miles to work every morning and back, you know, so I thought, right. I got in the car and he took me up to Kingston Hill. I knew I should be in second, so I stayed there. But when he said, now we'll stop on the hill. So we stopped. I thought, oh, I'll never get away. He said, I'll take the brake off for you. Off he went. And then he looked at his watch. He said, well, you know, the plane will be in very soon. Turn here. So I turned. I thought, oh, I'll never back. I'd never backed before. Right into the ditch. So he had to get me out of this. So when he came down, I thought, oh, I'll never. He said, right, you'll do for Norfolk Island. He gave me a license. I was ashamed to meet him after that. I really was. I was ashamed.
Have you hit much?
I haven't hit anything, not even a cow. Never a cow, that's $200.
Yes.
If you hit a person, it's cheaper.
The fact that you see the same people all the time must be a slight disadvantage, I would have thought. No new blood,
sometimes,
you know?
I know. It's like,
parties,
I think it's like living on a ship. You know everybody, you dodge a few, you welcome a few, but it's like ship life.
You've got to get away from here once a year, at least once a year.
This is true
You
enough,
must get away, otherwise you become a cabbage. I'm a cabbage now.
This island, to my mind, is an island of negatives from our point of view. You mentioned yourself there's no income tax, no death duties. There's also no undertaker's bills because they bury you free. We have no pedestrian crossings, no traffic lights, no parking meters, no parking attendants, no, by and large, no crime, no criminals. And no necessity to lock your car, if you ever thought of the nuisance of that every time you leave a car. We've no sewers, we've no gas except in cylinders. We have electricity, but it is those negatives which reduce life to a very quiet life instead of the pressure and the rat race of England.
There's an agreeably zany quality about life on this forgotten island, 5 miles by 3 and at least a century behind the outside world. This, for example, has to be the most beautiful rubbish dump in the world. The refuse of 1,200 islanders goes down into the blue Pacific to be pounded to pieces on those rocks. Though before it gets there, much of the tastier rubbish is eaten. There's so much life in these waters, fishermen expect to catch a pound of fish per person per minute. Since volcanic Norfolk has no harbour, it's not only the catch that has to be lifted ashore, but boat and fishermen as well. This is as much bustle as you'll find here, on a jetty also to be seen on the island's only visible means of support. Norfolk, which manages without a postal service itself, has got in on the South Pacific philatelic rush and is busy churning out whatever the stamp committee can dream up and collectors will buy. The income from stamps last year was £120,000, or £100 a head for every islander.
The first lot, anyhow, they've had some very good sales on them. They're proving very popular. I've just got a telegram today from Philatelic Melbourne. They want another 550 sheets of each one, which was good for us.
Having run out of birds, the committee looks for local boys who've made good.
The only one I've thought of so far for next year, and I think it's appropriate, is the centenary of the death of Bishop Patterson when he was murdered in Solomon Islands.
Solomon Islands, yes.
The date, I think, is September, which unfortunately is slightly close to our Christmas stamp, but this can't be helped. We'll have to have it on the centenary of his death.
A stamp hardly designed to commemorate one of Bishop Patterson's happier moments.
Yes, he was clubbed as he lay down in a native hut, and then his body drifted out to sea in a canoe.
The island's other source of income, a tax on liquor, last year provided £30,000. The bonds run by Albert Bathy, the only socialist councillor.
And the only mainlander.
How long do you think the island can go on escaping taxation as it does?
Well, with the number of companies, the influx of companies, I believe that we could be on the threshold of some changes. I believe it would be to the betterment of the individual themselves.
You want to pay tax?
I believe that we should pay. Anybody that enjoys the privileges and protection of a community should stand up to its responsibilities.
Now, you must be a very popular chap if you want to introduce taxation.
Well, I still get on the council.
This Australian territory receives a grant of £40,000 a year from Canberra, and the Advisory Council, Norfolk's Parliament of 8, is presided over by an Australian administrator.
And we must make some decisions in respect of, say, where a parking area will be, why a particular building had only been X number of feet from the roadside, and so on.
The Advisory Council's just doubled the island's police force. This used to be it, but now Sergeant Bill from Sydney has a local constable to help cope.
Officially, I'm Collector of Customs. I'm also Crown Prosecutor. I'm also Licensing Inspector, Stock Inspector, Inspector of Weights and Measures, Inspector of Boarding Houses, Assistant Health Inspector, Skill Reporting Officer and Truancy Officer, and Sheriff, Bailiff, and last of all, of course, Police Officer. But officially there are 17 appointments.
17 caps?
That's true, yes.
So as a police officer, you really haven't got too much to do, it seems to me, because you've got no crime to handle.
As far as the police aspect is concerned, that's pretty right. There isn't any crime to speak of anyhow.
The islanders, at any rate, seem to me they tend to be non-teetotalers.
Non-teetotalers? How do you mean?
I mean, they're fairly convivial people. They don't.
Oh, yes, certainly.
They don't object to a drink, or
no, they certainly like their drink. There's no doubt about that. We do have an occasional problem with this drink.
That usually puts a bit of business your way.
It does, but strangely enough, they seem to confine their squabbles and problems among themselves, and there isn't any great resentment to outsiders in respect to this drinking problem, and they respect the police by the same token.
What about crimes of passion?
No, we haven't had any crimes of passion.
South Seas, you know, they should be.
Well, they say this, yes, but I don't think that the generation, the present generation of Norfolk Islands, I think, don't seem to be any different than our own people. As far as this South Seas passion business is concerned, I haven't had any evidence of it anyhow.
Talking of South Seas passion, they did have a criminal here once, an ingratiating chap who just wouldn't pay his wife's maintenance.
And the poor old magistrate didn't know what to do, so he condemned him to the cells. There are 2 or 3 down at Kingston. Well, now, we've got no prison staff, or prison warders, or prison governor, and it comes under the heading of the policeman. Well, the policeman has a lot of other duties here. He's customs officer, inspector of noxious weeds, and a variety of other things. And the result is this prisoner in the cell has to be fed, and they let him go around to the library and pick out some paperbacks, and he's allowed to have those. But for feeding is done by the policeman's wife. Well, this chap was very handy, and he put her in the family way as well. So you can see the problems of dealing with crime here.
So to fill the pages of Norfolk's Weekly, the island's press baron, Tom Lloyd, has no crime and precious little scandal. He's editor, he writes the paper, and he prints it. And however it reads, it certainly sounds good. Oh yes, and he's also the circulation manager.
Morning, Tom. What have you got this morning?
Just about the
Yes, terrible.
Well, I must fly.
See you later.
Good morning, Robert. How are you?
What's the news today?
Oh, mostly about the fire at Kingston this morning.
It didn't say much on the radio about it this morning, did it?
Not a great deal.
It's a rather sad affair, isn't it?
Fair
Got
enough.
the beer?
Oh, not this morning. I've got too much work to do.
Oh, you get on with it.
See you later, then. One of our more topical columns that we had at one stage resulted in us being taken to court on a libel action. We were prepared to fight it, but legal advice told us that whereas I thought I might be safe under Australian laws, the laws pertaining to Norfolk go back to the English law of about 1796 or something. It was not a case of me versus the offended party, but a case of me versus the Crown, and for such things I could be transported to, well, I suppose back to England for 7 years. But it cost me $100.
Sentenced to serve your sentence in London, yes. Golly.
Threatened to be thrown over headstone, you know, and that's the rubbish tip. One irate islander who I criticised for selling land. I'll see you and your bloody printing press over headstone before I'm finished. However, that's all part and parcel of Norfolk. I like to think of Norfolk as a 19th century island just dropped right in the middle of the 20th century. We just like Topsy, we grew, unfortunately.
As everywhere else in the world, development has not pleased the locals. Squadrons of tourist self-drive cars are replacing traditional transport on the 8 miles of sealed roads and the 50 miles of coral tracks. Norfolk has one streetlight so far, and they've just introduced a stop sign. But Burnt Pine, the island's Oxford Street, has grown into a bizarre shanty town. Here, the Australian tourists are offered whiskey at 28 shillings a bottle amid the usual duty-free glitter, cheap watches, radios and cameras. This is Norfolk's one unhappy stab at progress. A more elegant area, Quality Row, built for the governor and prison officials in 1828. Number 9 boasts the island's first carpet, as well as its latest business breakthrough. The discovery that, surprise, surprise, this is a tax haven, a South Pacific Liechtenstein, a Nassau. 1,300 companies are registered here to escape mainland company tax, most of them presided over by an astute Sydney solicitor, Mr. Neil McIntyre. You conduct correspondence in this island paper, the Norfolk Islander, and I see you've just written, to the best of my belief and constant endeavour, what the companies do through my office is according strictly to the law and not evasion of tax.
That is so.
But I mean, if it weren't for the evasion of tax, your office wouldn't exist, presumably.
I think you're perhaps unacquainted with the niceties of avoidance and evasion. Avoidance is one of those things that the best people should do, and evasion is a sort of dirty word.
So the object of this office then is the avoidance of tax?
The object of this office is to provide to those requiring the service according to law. I, being a lawyer from way back...
To enable your clients to avoid tax?
If they are so minded. If they are so minded, yes.
Well, they'd hardly come to Norfolk for any other reason. It's a delightful island, but it's not a financial centre.
It may be well on the way to becoming a financial centre.
It is curious to think of Norfolk as a world's financial centre.
Very interesting and very good for Norfolk Island, I think. and I like to think very good for Australia too.
Very good for Mr. McIntyre.
The notion that someone found a pirate's treasure under a pine tree and this was the source of the money on Norfolk Island would hardly be exact, you see, because the money comes in with the approval of exchange control to one or other of the banks here and goes through the banks here to the Australian mainland for investment.
It's not a pirate's hoard, but what you've done is you've discovered a sort of pirate's hoard in the fine print, haven't you?
Well, I would say that we have discovered perhaps a sort of a conveyance for hoards, whether belonging to pirates or not in other parts of the world, I don't know, a sort of conveyance for money of that kind to where it's needed in Australia.
Well, you've got a certain buccaneering reputation, it seems to be, and if you're driving a coach and horses through the tax laws, this would add to your reputation.
Yes, I think that's perhaps rather flattering because although it would be nice to make the thing a sort of a stagecoach affair, it's a very orthodox and perfectly legal operation and perhaps only romantic because it's cast in the romantic South Pacific.
If the romantic South Pacific's a good place to live, Norfolk's a great place to die, for they bury you free. The gravedigger, Ike Edwards, will knock up a coffin that'll suit you down to the ground.
Oh, we'd bury you with a normal size.
Yeah.
You see, you're measured, and then it's measured so that you can be laid inside of the coffin, and then that's an inch planking all the way around, and then we allow another 2 inches after that.
Now, I'm told that the flag on the administrator's house is at half-mast if anybody dies.
Yes,
Anybody?
and administration buildings as well.
How many funerals have you attended in the last year?
Oh, there's about 9 up to date since of New Year's Day.
Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And maybe more, I hope not. I don't like the looks of the stock congregating in front of the cemetery gate, because a short while back they were roaming round the fence and they were bawling and bellowing. And according to some old people elder than I am, that's a bad sign.
What about the ghosts here? I'm told you have lots of ghosts.
Well, some people believe in it, but I don't.
Well, you're closer to them than anyone, so if you don't
I work in here every day, and I've been in and out of here over 40 years, and I never bumped one here at any time of the night that I passed here, day or night.
You see, to me, it's not an unfriendly place at all. This is the most lovely, handsome, friendly graveyard I've ever seen in my life.
Well, it is, because you can walk any way you like, and they won't get up and fight with you.
What do you think about these people you're watching over?
Well, I don't know. I think they had a hard life and everything, but the few free settlers who was left reckoned the convicts termed it the paradise of the Pacific in one way, and another it's the hell on earth.